Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today I want to talk about the importance of mentoring and the massive influence that each one of us can have in the lives of others. And I want to do this by reviewing the people that have literally changed my life. Hebrews chapter 13 has a really powerful verse regarding all these things. This is Hebrews 13:7. It says, "Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith." In Hebrews, the last part of it, you have the wonderful chapter in chapter 11 that's known as the faith chapter, and the author of the Hebrews lays out all these Old Testament heroes who stood the test of time. And if you do have some fun and have time, go and look up the word endurance and perseverance. It shows up in both noun and verb forms at the end of chapter 10, and then in chapter 12. So it kind of wraps this faith chapter, and the idea is, how do you build that perseverance, that resilience? And a big part of it is to look at people who have stood the test of time. And it is interesting at the end that the author specifically says, remember your leaders. And so I want to, in a sense, dedicate this to the people, the men and women that poured themselves into me to help me to be where I am today. And I also want, as you're listening to this episode, I want each of us to think about who are people in our lives that we essentially are paying it forward for, that we're investing in, that maybe 30, 40, even 50 years. I'm going to go all the way back to some of my Sunday school teachers poured into you and helped you to grow into that person that God created each one of us to be. And if you find this episode helpful, I would be really grateful if you would subscribe, if you'd like, and if you could leave a review. Please share it with friends. I'm in the process of rebooting things. It's been a little slow putting out episodes. I have been having some health problems over the last 3 or 4 months that should be getting taken care of in August. And I hope to be back to having more frequent episodes, and I'm going to begin having guests on again. So I appreciate those who have continued to listen, but it would be really helpful if you haven't subscribed to go ahead and hit subscribe, because that'll let other people find this, especially once things get going again. And also, a way that you can support the podcast is if you do use Amazon. I do have suggested readings and links, and if you follow those links and they're Amazon links, I get a very small percentage of whatever you buy. And you don't have to buy, links go to my books. But even if you shop and get toilet paper on Amazon, if you buy through the link, ultimately get to what you're looking for. That's one way that doesn't change your price at all, that allows you to support the places where I host this show. Again, grateful to have you as a listener. And now let's jump into my episode on mentoring. Again, we've heard the Hebrews piece. I'm going to go all the way back to my first grade Sunday school teachers, and I still remember their name after all these years. It was Mike and Janet Nolan. I don't know if they're still living. I haven't seen them for decades, but they were volunteer Sunday school teachers in the children's program at Hope United Methodist Church, which was the church that my parents took me to beginning when I was in preschool, and I essentially was involved in that congregation until I went to seminary, and that's the church out of which I was ultimately called to ministry. That gave me its approval and allowed me to have my ordination initially in the United Methodist Church in East Ohio, and I'm grateful for that. And so when I think back to my first Sunday school teachers, the thing I remember about Mike and Janet is they made the Bible fun. They had the felt, they had the old felt boards if you're old enough, where you had the Bible characters up there, and I just remember that they loved the Bible. And I remember learning about Abraham from them. Again, these are just really old memories. I don't have a lot of depth and stuff in there, but those are my Sunday school teachers that I remember. I can still see faces from the other people, but I'm a product of Sunday school, and I'm just glad that I had volunteers and I don't remember Mike and Janet having kids yet. They were a young couple, but they loved the next generation enough to spend some time teaching Sunday school, and little did they know that of all the goofy kids that were in that class, and I was probably the biggest goof, that they were literally teaching somebody and introducing somebody to the Bible that would someday actually be a professor of biblical studies. So I want to say thanks, Mike and Janet, for loving me enough when I was just a little empty-headed kid that didn't really know much of anything, and teaching me the Bible stories. So thank you. And then as I move along, I'm grateful that I had a great youth program because I needed that. Youth, it's always difficult, that age of adolescence, and I really didn't even want anything to do with church, and I was kind of rebelling against my parents even wanting me to go to church. But they had some great youth pastors, and we're not paid. Again, I have nothing against paid youth pastors, but I am the product of a volunteer youth program at Hope United Methodist Church. I remember there was Julie Snyder, Rick and Jill Darst. Jill was actually Julie's sister. Steve Miller, Mark Holman. These were all people that were at that time would have been late 20s, early 30s, who surely had better things to do than hang around with youth. But they loved us. They took us on retreats. When I went and gave my life to Jesus Christ at an altar during a revival in 1985, when I was praying at the altar, when I opened my eyes, my youth pastors were there praying with me. And I want to give a special shout out to Steve and Cindy Miller. Steve in particular was instrumental. He was the smartest person that I had met up to that point in my life when I was a teenager. He may still be the smartest person I've ever met. He was a really high-level mathematician, and he, again, poured himself into the youth. And I needed somebody that was really smart because, as you might imagine, I was kind of this, I grew up working class. I was the first person in my family. My mom and dad didn't graduate from college, and so I'm on this trajectory to go to college. I'm not a guy that works with his hands. I was always just the smart kid that didn't really fit in. Steve was like a mentor for me because he was like me. And Steve is the one that challenged me at the New Year's Eve youth gathering in 1984, at that point in my life when I was really struggling. This would have been halfway through my 10th grade year, struggling with a lot of things, just typical, I think, youth stuff, but didn't know if I had faith. And he just challenged us all, would you read the Bible in 1985? And I didn't think that was a great idea, wasn't even interested, but a few months later, I was at kind of wit's end, and I was like, you know what? I really like Steve. I'm going to try to read the Bible. So I started reading the Bible in my bedroom in 1985. I started off with a simple prayer: Lord, if you're real, reveal yourself through your word. And a few weeks later, again, I still don't remember exact passage. It was somewhere in the Gospels I was reading. And then I went to the revival services that our church had. I went there mostly to hang out with the youth that were there. It was weekly, nightly preaching that week, and literally the evangelist preached on the exact text that I had read that day. And it was that day that I had my heart strangely warmed, literally felt lifted out of the pew and down at the front, and gave my life to Jesus. And so I want to thank you, youth pastors, volunteer youth pastors, for spending time with a guy that really needed you at the moment where you showed up in my life. I do stay in touch with Steve sometimes still. Obviously, he's in his, let's see, I'm trying to think how old he would be at this point. I guess he probably must be in his early 70s now. But what can you say? I'm 56, so youth, we grow up at some point. But again, the Nolans would have been my Sunday school teachers 50 years ago. All those youth pastors, we're talking the era of 1983 to 1987. So that's 40 years ago when these folks had an influence on my life. So I want to say thank you. And then late, when I was a teenager, my own pastor, Reverend Paul George, he's deceased now. He was an Asbury College graduate, and he'd experienced the revival at Asbury College and even had seen the revival come up to his church where he was serving at that time in East Liverpool, Ohio. And Pastor George was the person that took an interest in me. He saw me as a potential future pastor. I'd show up at prayer meetings. I was I was all in once I got converted. And so I'm showing up at the adult Bible studies. I'm showing up at the adult prayer meeting because I wanted whatever I could get. And it was Reverend Paul George who said to me, "Brian, have you ever thought about being a pastor?" Now, kind of like Steve, have you ever thought about reading the Bible? And I'm thinking like, no. But Pastor George put that little seed in there. He saw something in me and he reached out. Again, I was just a kid, probably 17 when he said that to me, but he had skin in the game. And just 2 years later, in between my first and second years of college, Pastor George invited me to come on sort of paid temporary part-time staff. He got our local church to pay me just a small amount each week, and I was Pastor George's personal assistant and kind of associate pastor for that summer, and he sent me out knocking on doors of the old membership list. He let me preach 3 times in front of our church. Again, not a huge church, but we probably had, I'm not sure at this point, 200-300 people in worship. So it was a medium-sized church. He let me preach 3 times in a summer, and I'd never preached before. So he let me do the things that a pastor would do. And at the end of that, that's when I got into, I have a call to ministry. It's being affirmed, and I became a certified candidate on my way to ordination. So thank you, Pastor George, for mentoring me and spending time with me and showing me what it was like to be a pastor. And that's what he did. He spent a lot of hours just talking to me, answering my questions, and teaching me things. He introduced me to authors like Oswald Chambers, which I'm super grateful for. Now, when I was in college, and by the way, I'm sorry I don't have any high school teachers that I can really say, hey, these were really instrumental. I am a product of public schools, and I had some good teachers, but I can't say that I really connected specifically with any particular teacher, though I did learn a lot, and I'm grateful for the teachers that I had. And this is no diss on my actual school teachers, but I can't remember having any Christian teacher explicitly that took a liking to me or really invested in me, which is, that's okay. But I had the local church, and I'm grateful for the local church for what they have done for me. Now, when I was in college, I did connect with a professor. Now, I went to the University of Akron. I was originally going to be an electrical engineer, and Akron was a great school for electrical engineering back in the 80s. I have no idea what it is now. But when I got that call to ministry, I'm like, I don't need all this. I don't need an electrical engineering degree. I need a humanities degree. So I switched to history, and I specialized. I'm grateful for this. Akron had like a classics department where they taught Greek, and they had all kinds of ancient history classes. So I ended up taking Professor Gary Aller, for 3 years of Greek. So that would have been 6 classes plus 2 or 3 ancient history classes. So I had this man for 8 or 9 classes, and I really liked him. He's one of the professors that wrote a recommendation for me when I went to seminary, and he taught me Greek. And that was the thing that actually allowed me to really excel once I got to seminary, because I can say, and I'm not even bragging, there weren't too many students that knew Greek better than me. And I'm talking from the moment I walked onto campus, because I had classical Greek with Dr. Aller in a very small class. And I also knew a lot about ancient history because of his teaching. And he was always kind. He always answered questions, and he even allowed us, my last semester, because I'm at a secular school, it was me and another guy taking Greek. We just happened to both be Christians. He let us, and he was Jewish. We read the book of Acts together that last semester that I was in college. So that was really awesome. Now I'm at Asbury Seminary. So now we're at 1991. That's when I had graduated from college. Now at Asbury Seminary, obviously I still am at Asbury, so I'm a product of Asbury Seminary. And I got there just a guy that had grown up in a local church, done a lot of reading on my own. But the best decision I ever made, and I talk about this in another episode, so I won't go through the story, is I took David Bauer for inductive Bible study in my very first semester, fall 1991. And I can't say enough for what David Bauer has done in my life, and that continues to this day. He's my dean. Now, David was mid-30s when I would have had him when I was 22, so I know that he's getting close to 70 years old now. Inductive Bible study was what I'd been waiting for my whole life when I took his class. It was hard, but he was so smart, so brilliant. I don't think I've ever met a biblical scholar that was smarter than David. He's well-read. He could answer every question. He was exactly what I wanted to be, a person that loved God, loved Scripture, and loved communicating it. And David had an open door policy, and I can honestly say I ended up only having him for 2 classes while I was a student, but I read Greek with him in a small group, and I was in his office literally for hours. So I learned more from him outside the classroom than I even did in the classroom. And he was the ultimate mentor. He taught me all about Scripture, about biblical studies, how to get into a PhD program. He actually introduced me to the professors that he studied with at Union Seminary, and I could say his reference was probably instrumental in allowing me to get in first choice. I think I was their first or second choice at Union that year for their cohort, and David Bauer opened up a lot of those doors. And when it was time, when I was finishing up and I was looking for a job, I know that David strongly advocated for me to be hired at Asbury. And I'm just going to say I'm grateful for the networking. It might not have been fair to everybody else that was applying in that, but I know that David's advocacy really helped me, all things being equal, for that search committee to pick me. So I can say thank you to David, essentially, for giving me the opportunity, even probably to be known enough to actually make videos like this and to even serve you today. And again, I want to give a shout out and recommend, if you're looking for a book on how to do deep Bible study, there literally is no better book on inductive Bible study than David Bauer, Robert Traina, Inductive Bible Study. So you can check the show notes up for that, and I highly recommend grabbing a copy of his book. He also has outstanding books on Matthew and Acts that are out. So thank you, David Bauer. Also had the privilege of meeting John Oswalt. John Oswalt's now in his early 80s. He's a professor at Asbury. He's been professor several different times. He's taught at a lot of institutions, but I had John Oswalt for Old Testament exegesis, and I am grateful that he knew I was interested in doing advanced studies, and so he always mentored a handful of students. Well, I found out recently, and I interviewed him. You can go back and listen to my interview with John Oswalt from a couple years ago on this podcast, but Dr. Oswalt began mentoring students sometime close to when I was a student, and I was in his office with, I think, 4 other young men every Friday at noon. Now, I can't remember if that went in the summer or was just the academic year, but it doesn't matter. He spent time, we all fasted that meal, and in that room, we shared our stories, we shared our struggles. I had my first experience of what you would call a Wesleyan band, and Dr. Oswalt was completely transparent in those sessions, so I learned a lot about what his struggles had been like, but he poured into us Scripture. And in particular, he taught us what entire sanctification is. And he was the person that really introduced me to the holiness message in just a clear, powerful, compelling way. And to this day, when I teach on holiness, I'm sure that I'm plagiarizing Dr. Oswalt. I try to give him credit, but I learned holiness in Scripture, a love for the Old Testament, a love for the authority of the Word from Dr. Oswalt. And again, I still see him from time to time, and I'm always so happy to see him because, again, David Bauer, John Oswalt, their time with me, that was worth $1 million. I'm so grateful. So thank you to those guys. Now, right at the end of my seminary career, I met Steve Harper. I had him for United Methodist Polity, which is probably the most boring class you take in seminary because it's the class you have to take to get ordained. And those of you who aren't pastors, every denomination has a set of rules and regulations on how they run things. And part of getting ordained is you have to kind of read the rule book. And so I only had Harper for that class. But that's how I got to meet Steve Harper, and he took a liking to me. I would consider him a mentor, not quite at that moment, but we really connected. He gave me some books that he didn't need anymore that were really great academic books. And at that moment, he shifted into becoming a director of a big scholarship foundation called a Foundation for Theological Education. He told me about it, and he encouraged me to apply. And that scholarship, which I got at fellowship, it was $32,000. That was back in 1996, and I got $8,000 a year. And that was a lot of money back then, and that essentially paid more than my tuition for my PhD program. And with a couple of the other grants I got, I was able to go to the PhD program free of tuition, and that helped to pay my room and board. And in fact, with other scholarships, my check, that $8,000 a year, paid the rent for the 4 years that I was at Richmond, Virginia, studying at Union. Now, and then when the Florida campus opened at Asbury Seminary, Steve was selected to be president. And again, there's a lot of things that went on behind me being hired. I think I wasn't literally the first choice to go down there. I don't know if I was a second choice, but I know I was the third choice. And sometimes being the third choice is good. But I know Steve had encouraged me to apply. And once I was hired, super grateful. Steve was a mentor. He wasn't just kind of the president, and he was the president of the Florida campus, but vice president at Asbury. He was a mentor. He showed radical hospitality. He modeled generosity. He was so kind to all the students. He and Jeannie were like father and mother to every student that went through the Florida campus. And he stuck up for me at times when he was needed. He mentored me. He encouraged me. And I just want to say thank you to Steve Harper. And matter of fact, those of you who like my Centering Prayer book, in 2019, when I had finished the manuscript, wasn't sure if I had a good book or not. And Steve had, by this time, had been gone from the Asbury for, I guess, close to 10 years at that point. I reached out to Steve late 2019. And I said, hey, I have this book. Would you take a look at it? I'm not sure if it's good enough to be published for spiritual formation. And Steve read my original manuscript of Centering Prayer, thought it was good enough that he reached out and found the right publisher for me to go with, and he suggested Paraclete. And as I've said in other settings, this was the easiest book that ever got published. Paraclete loved my book proposal, and in a sense, Centering Prayer's gone on to sell. I think I'm getting close to 5,000 copies of that book now, and so I'm really grateful again to Steve Harper for all that he's done for my life, including giving me that opportunity on the Orlando campus and being such a great model of servant leadership. One of my favorite colleagues in the Florida campus was Dr. Bob Tuttle. We actually came to Florida at the same time. I had met Bob a few years earlier because I think he came back to Asbury, I think like in 95 or so, right when I was getting ready to do the PhD work. I was teaching Greek and Hebrew at the time, but he came on, so I met him at a faculty meeting, and he was a character from the beginning. But one of the real blessings of my life was that the last 10 years that he was teaching, or 11 years, he was my colleague in Orlando. And Bob was generous. He had a house and he had a little pontoon boat. He used to let me bring my family out to go on pontoon boat rides in the St. Johns River. He was invaluable as a mentor for me getting ready to be a professor. Like he always told me jokingly, and he says things like, son, you're not going to make it in this business unless you learn how to grade papers during faculty meetings. And so he kind of told me, hey, it was okay sometimes when you're in a really long meeting that is just mostly information. Yeah, you can do some grading while you're sitting in there. I'll just say that as kind of a fun thing because he was a character. But what Tuttle really did, Bob Tuttle, the ultimate mentor to me, I would say Bob Tuttle is the one person that I've ever met that every single thing that he said to me spiritually was 100% true. Didn't always listen to him right off the bat, but everything he told me was true. And let me just share a couple of things that really helped. He told me first that I needed to lower my expectations, that I had way too high of expectations for other people. He said, if you lower your expectations, you'll never be disappointed. Well, original me hated that because it's like, I don't want to lower expectations. I want to have sky high expectations. Well, Tuttle was right. Like, I have high standards for myself and I have high expectations for myself, but I've lowered my expectations for other people because I always let other people have the opportunity to have a bad day and not hold it against them. So, if you're having trouble with other people continuously, the problem's probably that perhaps our expectations are a little too high. Hold yourself to high standards. And if you have a team, you can have some kind of high standards. But if you walk around with massive expectations for how other people are always supposed to do things, you'll be continually disappointed. Tuttle 100% right. The other thing he taught me was, this was a missional thing. Bob was such a great evangelist, and he always said, pray to God that you would see other people as though they were your own children. Pray to God that you'd see other people as though they were your own children. Now, I always add the caveat, that assumes you like your own children, right? And being a little funny on that one. But if God gives you those kind of eyes, it completely changes your relationship with other people, right? Even people that sometimes are difficult, pray that you see them as your own children that you love. Game changer for navigating conflict, interpersonal relationships. Again, thank you, Bob, for that. And then I love his saying, and I've said it so many times, he always said, the key to life, show up, pay attention, know that God has way more invested in this than you do. Show up, pay attention, know that God has way more invested in this than you do. And again, I just want to shout out to Bob. Bob's in his early 80s now too. And I'm thankful for him, grateful that he was such a great mentor. And he also modeled just being a mentor. One of the things that Bob did, I'm not sure if he's still able to keep this up, but he always mentored several students. And that's encouraged me to try to be a mentor to students that I have the opportunity to serve now as a professor, because we don't have to do that, but I want to invest in a handful of students. And I run, for those who are at the seminary, I run a monthly Zoom call that's open to Asbury students, because I want to talk about spiritual formation. And then I do get into some mentoring relationship with a handful of students. And also Bob would read a Bible every year, put notes in the margins, and then give that Bible away. I've never actually done that, but Bob did that for years, and Bob mentored pastors. And there's like a who's who of people that got mentored by Bob Tuttle. And again, he saw something in these folks, but a lot of the folks that Bob mentored have gone on to having significant roles and to have significant ministry roles that have helped to shape the future of the church. So thank you, Bob Tuttle, for what you've did for me. My first provost, I guess it was the second provost, but it was really early on, was Joel Green, a great New Testament scholar. And I love Joel. Joel always had time. He would go to lunch with me, encourage me. I'd met Joel before he went to Asbury. But the one thing I can say about Joel is the kind of mentor that helps you get opportunities. Essentially, most of the big writing projects that I've had the privilege of participating in, other than things that I self-generated, were because of Joel. Let me just give you a couple of examples. Joel used to edit a magazine called Catalyst that came out for United Methodist Seminarians. Joel, I said, can I write an article? He said yes. He didn't even ask me what the article was about. He literally gave me my first publishing opportunity. And then I had the opportunity to work on, this is the Wesley Study Bible. He invited me to write the commentary section on Exodus in the Wesley Study Bible. Thank you, Joel. The Wesley one-volume commentary. He had health problems, but he was going to be the New Testament editor for this. And he's the one that got me the opportunity to put my name in so I could write Deuteronomy. And then I was even invited to write Philippians. And again, that was the influence of Joel Green on my life. And I could say other things about Joel. Joel wrote he wrote a recommendation for a blurb from my first academic book, Realigning with God, reading scripture for church and world. And he's the kind of mentor that you want, that opens the door, that he's a bridge builder with people, always interested in conversations. And I'm thankful that I had a provost like Joel Green when I first got started, who invested in me as a junior faculty member and helped me to become the best scholar that I've been able to be. So thank you, Joel. And he's still alive too. He went out to Fuller, and Joel's still doing well. And you could check out his Substack if you'd like to see what Joel's up to. Just a couple more as we're kind of closing in on the end of this. I would say my next mentor was Doug Matthews, who was the provost at Asbury while I was dean. We both kind of took the job at the same time. I became dean on an interim basis at the end of 2012, and Doug became the full-blown provost at the beginning of 2013. He hired me and kept me on as dean, and we had the privilege of working together, I guess, for about 9 years. And I just really appreciated, he wasn't like formally mentoring me, but I appreciated serving under Doug's leadership. And one of the things that I'll always remember was, first of all, was kind of his upbeat positivity, can-do spirit that he tried to instill in our academic council. But I loved his philosophy that he lived by was autopsy without blame. Those of you who work with me as a coach know that I like to use that language too, autopsy without blame. I learned that from Doug Matthews. And the idea is when something goes south, don't try to hide it, but instead let's get the facts on the table so that we can analyze them, so that we can figure out like what might have gone, how might this have worked if we would have tweaked a few things, or what lessons can we draw that we want about things that we want to avoid the next time. So that was really fun, and I'm grateful for a leader like Doug. He let us, under my leadership, make the shift to hybrid, say on the Orlando campus, and had a lot of trust. And so I learned from Doug autopsy without blame, and trust the people that work for you to get the results that without actually trying to micromanage. So I really loved working with Doug. And again, he's doing well. He's a pastor in Lexington now after his days as the provost were open. And then I want to name at the end here, I'm going to name a quartet of really friends that are such great friends that these are people that have poured into my life in powerful ways, and not mentors per se, but really deep friendships where we kind of cross-pollinate and maybe mentor each other. And so this last group of folks would be, I'm going to name them, actually 5: Eric Hallett, Eric Curry, Steve Gober, Mark Danzy, Mark Dunwoody. Eric Hallett, I met him in seminary. We've been friends since, I'm going to say, 1992, 93. I'm super grateful for Eric when he was, for a short time, a pastor in Orlando. We met for breakfast, and he is the one that introduced me to all things missional, and he actually kind of mentored me in what missional church would be. And those of you who love my missional reading of Scripture and that aspect of my own ministry, I have to say I got that from Eric Hallett. Eric has gone on. He's now a district superintendent, which is kind of like a bishop in the Wesleyan Church. I think it's in the Central District up in Canada. It's the whatever the district is that encompasses Ontario. So Eric's doing great. He's been a great friend and a lot of fun. Then I want to say Eric Curry, my other Canadian friend. Eric's been a friend. He was a student in my very first class in Orlando. And we've planted a church together. We walked together. We conspired together. He was my partner along with Steve Gober when we kind of created what the Orlando campus ultimately was, kind of this integrated system. I've always appreciated Eric for his networking ability, his positivity, and in his ability to actually really market things really well and a commitment to students. And I'm grateful for what, again, Eric Hallett, Eric Curry's done in my life. Steve Gober, exactly the same. Again, he was a partner. Eric and I were kind of a threesome down in Orlando trying to lead during the final years of the Orlando campus. We had a lot of fun. It was literally Steve and I that took the risk on the actually launching the hybrids in 2015. Eric Curry had given me the original idea before that, but Steve and I were, before Eric came back to Orlando, we executed on that idea and expanded it. Always appreciated Steve for his pastoral heart, his love for God, his prayer, and his real calm under pressure. Mark Danzy was my personal coach, and he helped me a lot towards the end of my serving as a dean. We've become really good friends, and we've done some coaching programs together. But I got to say thank you, Mark Danzy, for teaching me how to coach, by actually coaching me really well. And then I want to give a shout out to Mark Dunwoody. Met him in 2020. We've talked on Zoom for 5 years. I literally met Mark here in the middle of August of 2025 in person. But Mark and I, he's a thought partner. We talk about entrepreneurship, coaching, mission, all those kind of things. And what I've learned about Mark is just as a quiet, can-do spirit of thinking big, executing ideas, and he's been a generous friend, and he actually is showed me the power of having long distance relationship via Zoom, though I did finally meet him just this week. So friends, that's a list of some of the people, and I could have put others in here, that literally have helped me to become the person that I am today. And I want to end this with a challenge. Write down the people that served you, that helped you. Who are they? Because you have a story just like mine. And then even more importantly, who are 2 or 3 people in your life right now that you can then sort of play that same role for, that now maybe in 10, 20, 30, even 40 or 50 years might become a key leader in the Christ following movement, right? So the moral of this whole story is every single one of us has way more influence than we think. So invest your time in other people. It's the only way the Jesus movement actually grows, because that is the way, through mentorship. So if you're a pastor, you have lots of things to do, but make sure you save time to look for that little Brian Russell that might be in your congregation. It could be 17, it could be 20, it could be 30, it could be 40, it could be Brianna Russell for that matter too, right? Because this isn't just restricted to men. So who are you mentoring? Again, if I could be of any service to you, or if you have questions, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me. I have all the links in the show notes. And until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.